The afternoon heat was fading, but the canyon still held the smell of dust and rain. Cole Maddox rode slow, his horse breathing hard from the climb. The San Verde River cut through the rocks below, wide and fast, carrying the last of the spring floods. He scanned the valley out of habit, the kind of focus that came from years of tracking men who didn't want to be found. He had been on the trail for 2 days. The job was simple on paper. Bring in a runaway Apache scout named Aiyana. There was a bounty on her head, enough to keep him fed for months. But the rumors didn't sit right. Stories about a woman who'd vanished after a raid, stories about militia lies. Still, work was work, and Cole didn't have the kind of life that left room for asking questions. He pulled the brim of his hat lower against the glare and checked the river again. The sound of it carried up through the canyon, heavy, fast, violent. Then something caught his eye. A shape in the current. A person. At first, he thought it was driftwood, but then an arm moved, a hand breaking the surface once, then disappearing. His stomach dropped. There wasn't time to think. He swung down from the saddle, tossed his rifle aside, and ran down the slope. Rocks slipped under his boots, cutting his palms when he hit the bottom. The river was worse up close, white water and foam, cold enough to make the air bite. He didn't stop to check how deep it was. He dove. The current hit him like a wall. He couldn't see. The water filled his nose and ears, dragging him downstream. He forced himself up for air, turned his head, and saw her, maybe 20 feet away, face down, clothes caught on a branch. He pushed toward her, legs kicking, lungs burning. When he reached her, her body was limp. He got an arm around her chest, turned her face upward, and kicked toward the shallows. The current kept pulling, fighting him with every stroke. His arms shook from the cold, and his fingers went numb. By the time he dragged her onto the gravel bank, both of them were half drowned and gasping. He pulled her up onto her side, pressing on her back until water spilled from her mouth. She coughed, once, then again, chest rising with a weak breath. Cole sat back on his heels, shaking, watching for any sign she'd start breathing steady. She did. Slowly. Her skin was cold, her lips pale, but her heartbeat was there under his fingers. Relief hit him hard, then the thought followed, what the hell am I doing? He looked up the river, checked for movement. No one else around. Just him, her, and the sound of water. She opened her eyes. Dark, sharp, unfocused at first, then fixed on him. Her expression changed fast. Confusion, then fear. She tried to push herself up, but her arms gave out. "Easy," he said quietly. His voice came out rough, lower than usual. "You're all right." She blinked, coughed again, then rasped, "You should have let the river take me." He frowned. "Ain't my habit to watch people drown." Her gaze locked on his badge, the small tin star half hidden under his coat. He saw the way her eyes hardened. He wanted to tell her he wasn't wearing it for pride anymore, but words like that didn't matter right now. He stood, looked around for wood, and started a fire. His hands shook while he worked, part cold, part nerves. He didn't like how quiet it was out here. No birds, no wind, just that river. He went back to her, crouched by the fire, and took off his coat, wrapping it around her shoulders. "You need to get warm," he said. She didn't thank him. She didn't even look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the flames, but he noticed her shivering start to slow. He sat a few feet away, elbows on his knees, staring at the ground. The job was clear. If she was who he thought she was, he was supposed to bring her in. Dead or alive. But sitting here, watching her cough up river water and fight to stay awake, that idea felt wrong. Cole tried to remind himself it wasn't his problem. But he'd seen plenty of people left for dead before, and something about her, the way she looked right through him without fear, made it impossible to just walk away. For now, he told himself, she was just another lost soul pulled from the current. Tomorrow, he'd figure out what to do. The sun had long set behind the jagged rocks, leaving the land painted in deep blue and orange shadows. The campfire was small, but its crackling sound filled the silence between the two strangers. The only other noise was the faint rush of the nearby river, the same one that had almost taken her life a few hours ago. Cole sat across from her, his back straight, his hat shadowing half his face. He was cleaning his revolver, slow and methodical, wiping away sand and moisture with a piece of cloth. The way he handled the weapon, careful, almost respectful, said everything about him. A man used to danger. A man who didn't talk unless he had to. Across the fire, the Apache woman, her name, he had learned, was Aiyana, watched him with guarded eyes. Her clothes were torn from the river. Her long dark hair clung to her shoulders, still damp. Cole had given her his coat, a heavy brown duster that dwarfed her frame, but she hadn't complained. She sat wrapped in it, her hands near the fire, silent but alert. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Cole wasn't sure if it was the right thing to start talking. He'd seen enough out here to know when someone was on edge, and this woman had every reason to be. Still, the silence was thick enough to make him uncomfortable. He finally broke it. "You from one of the camps upriver?" he asked, voice low, steady. She didn't look at him. "Was," she said. Her English was clear but accented. "They burned it. Soldiers." Cole paused, setting the revolver down. He didn't answer right away. There was a long moment where the fire popped between them, throwing light over her face, strong jawline, tired eyes, and a streak of defiance that hadn't drowned with her body. "I'm sorry," he said, finally. It wasn't much, but it was honest. Aiyana nodded once, but her expression didn't soften. "Sorry doesn't stop bullets." Cole met her gaze. "No, it doesn't." He leaned back, resting his arms on his knees. "But it keeps a man human." For the first time, she looked directly at him. There was something in her eyes, confusion, maybe disbelief. She studied him as if trying to figure out what kind of man said things like that. Most white men she'd met didn't talk about being human when they looked at her people. "You're not with them?" she asked after a pause. He shook his head. "Used to ride with the army, long time ago." "Don't anymore." "Why?" He hesitated. His first instinct was to brush it off, keep the walls up. But something in her voice, not accusation, just curiosity, made him answer. "Got tired of fighting for people who don't care who dies." She looked down, her fingers tightening around the edge of the coat. "Then you're alone now." "Seems that way." The wind picked up, blowing sparks into the night. The firelight flickered over both their faces, softening the hard lines. For the first time, the distance between them didn't feel so wide. Aiyana shifted closer to the flames. "You saved me," she said, her tone flat but heavy with meaning. "Did what anyone would have done," he said. She gave him a long, quiet look. "Not everyone would have." That made him glance at her, really look this time. The flicker of her eyes, the way her lips tightened as if holding something back. Gratitude, maybe. Or anger. Maybe both. He felt something in his chest stir, not attraction, not yet, but awareness. The kind that reminded him she wasn't just someone he'd pulled from the river. She was strong. Determined. And under the dirt and bruises, there was beauty, raw and sharp. Cole looked away, poking at the fire with a stick. "You should rest. I'll take first watch." She hesitated, then nodded. But before lying down, she asked quietly, "Why did you save me?" He paused, thinking about it. He could have said it was instinct. He could have said it was just the right thing to do. But the truth came out before he had time to weigh it. Didn't seem right, the river taking someone like you. Aiyana didn't reply. She lay down on the other side of the fire, her back to him, still clutching the coat tight. But her breathing stayed uneven for a while, and Cole knew she was awake, just like him. The night deepened, and the fire burned low. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled. Cole's hand rested on his revolver, eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the flames. But his thoughts kept circling back to her, the woman who had looked at him like she was seeing someone she didn't quite understand. He didn't trust her yet. But he didn't want to lose sight of her either. And that, he realized, might be more dangerous than anything waiting out there in the dark. Morning came quietly, but not peacefully. The first sound that broke the calm was the clicking of a horse's bridle somewhere down the slope. It wasn't close, not yet, but it was steady. Intentional. Cole was already awake when he heard it. He'd been sitting by the dying fire, eyes half open, waiting for the sun to rise. When the sound reached him, he froze for half a second, his hand instinctively going to his revolver. Years of habit kicked in, breathe first, then move. He turned his head toward Aiyana. She was still asleep, her face half hidden under his coat. Her breathing was slow, steady. For a brief moment, he hesitated. He didn't want to wake her into another panic after what she'd gone through the day before. But the noise came again. A soft grunt of a horse. Then a voice, low, rough, male. Cole stood. Quietly, he reached over and touched her shoulder. "Aiyana," he said, barely above a whisper. Her eyes opened instantly, sharp and alert. She sat up, confusion turning into focus when she saw his face. "What is it?" "Riders. Maybe 2, maybe more." She didn't ask who. She already knew. Her body tensed as she glanced toward the trees. "Soldiers." Cole didn't answer, but the look on his face was enough. They moved fast. He kicked dirt over the fire while she gathered what little she had, a leather strap, a small pouch, the blanket. She tied her hair back, hands trembling slightly, but her movements were controlled. Fear was there, but so was determination. "Which way?" she asked. Cole scanned the terrain. Dry riverbed to the east, rocky hills to the north. He'd been through this area before. The riverbed offered cover, but only for a while. "We move along the bank," he said. "If they're tracking, it'll buy us some time." Aiyana nodded once. She didn't question him. They started moving just as the voices grew clearer. 2 men, maybe 3, talking in the distance. One laughed. The sound was harsh in the morning stillness. Cole led the way, crouched low, stepping carefully through the brush. Every sound felt too loud, the crunch of gravel, the shift of a branch. Aiyana followed close behind. Her bare feet moved soundlessly compared to his boots. Despite everything, he noticed how she kept glancing around, alert, scanning the trees. She wasn't helpless. She was scared, yes, but her mind was working, like someone used to surviving. They reached the dry riverbed and started down the slope. The sand was cool underfoot, still holding the night's chill. Cole motioned for her to stay low. He stopped for a moment, crouching behind a cluster of rocks, and peered back through the scrub. He could see them now, 3 riders, just coming into view over the ridge. The lead one wore a blue army coat. The other 2 looked like trackers, rifles slung low. Cole's stomach tightened. He'd seen that kind of patrol before, soldiers pretending to bring order, but half of them looking for bounties or revenge. Aiyana noticed his expression. "You know them." "Not these men," he said quietly, "but I know their kind." He checked the cylinder on his revolver, then slipped it back into the holster. "If they see us, don't run in the open. Head for the rocks. I'll draw them off." She looked at him, frowning. "You'll get killed." He didn't respond right away. He just watched the riders, calculating. Finally, he said, "Not if we move smart." Before she could argue, he started moving again. They followed the curve of the riverbed for several minutes, the sun climbing higher. Sweat ran down his neck. Every step felt like a countdown. The ground was open now, fewer places to hide. Then, behind them, a sharp whistle. Someone had spotted movement. "Go," Cole said, grabbing Aiyana's arm and pulling her forward. They ran. Dust kicked up behind them. Shouts followed, then the crack of a rifle. The shot hit the dirt a few feet from Aiyana's feet. She flinched but kept running. Cole turned just enough to fire one quick shot in return, not to hit, just to slow them down. They reached a narrow cut in the rocks, barely wide enough for one person. Cole shoved her through first. "Keep going. Don't stop till you hit the other side." Aiyana disappeared into the gap. Cole fired again, then ducked after her, bullets splintering stone behind him. He could hear the men cursing, horses snorting. The gap twisted into a steep incline, and they climbed, scraping hands and knees on sharp rock. By the time they reached the top, both were gasping for air. Below them, the soldiers circled, trying to find a way around. "They'll come," Aiyana said between breaths. "Yeah," Cole replied, scanning the ridge. "But not before we're gone." He turned toward the far side, a narrow trail leading into the canyon beyond. It wasn't safe, but it was distance. He looked back once more, the smoke from the riverbed rising, the men below, searching. Then his eyes met hers. She was staring at him, exhausted, frightened, but alive. For the first time, he saw the trust there. Not blind, but earned, piece by piece. "You saved me again," she said quietly. Cole looked away, adjusting his hat. "Let's just make it count." They kept moving. Step by step, deeper into the canyon, where the sun couldn't reach yet. Neither spoke again for a long while, the sound of their breathing and the echo of boots against stone filling the silence. But both of them were thinking the same thing. This was no longer about a rescue. They were bound now, by survival, by danger, and by something neither of them wanted to name just yet. The canyon opened into a narrow valley by late afternoon. The sun dropped low enough that the light hit the rocks at a slant, turning them pale and flat. The wind had died down, and the only sound was the crunch of boots on dry earth. Cole's legs ached. His shirt was damp with sweat and streaked with dust. Every muscle felt stretched thin from the climb and the chase, but he didn't slow down until he saw what he'd been hoping for, an old shack half buried in the brush near a cluster of cottonwoods. It looked abandoned for years, maybe decades, roof sagging, windows boarded up, one door hanging crooked. But it was shelter. That was all that mattered. Cole motioned for Aiyana to stay put while he checked inside. He drew his revolver, stepped up to the porch, and nudged the door open with his boot. The hinges gave a long creak. Inside, the place smelled of dry wood, dust, and rodent droppings. No movement. No voices. He stepped through slowly, scanning every corner, an overturned chair, a broken table, a pile of rotted firewood. He could see the back wall through gaps in the boards. Safe enough. He turned back toward the doorway. "It's clear," he said. Aiyana stepped in cautiously, glancing around. Her eyes lingered on the few things that hinted at whoever once lived there: a rusted lantern, a cracked mug, a scrap of cloth half buried under the dirt. She didn't say anything. Cole dropped his saddlebag by the wall and took off his hat. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the grit. "We'll rest here till dark," he said. "Then move again. If they're still tracking, they'll pass through the canyon by morning." Aiyana nodded. "You think they'll give up?" "No," he said. "But they'll slow down once the light's gone. They'll camp before they risk the rocks in the dark." She looked out through a crack in the boards, her face tense but steady. The silence stretched between them again, heavy with everything that hadn't been said since they started running. Cole busied himself with what he knew. Control what you can. He gathered what scraps of dry wood were left and started a small fire in the old hearth. It took several tries. His hands were stiff, his patience thin. When the flames caught, he sat back on his heels, watching the light flicker. Aiyana stayed near the doorway at first, then slowly came closer. Her movements were careful, almost cautious, as if she didn't quite trust the quiet. She sat a few feet from him, knees drawn up, eyes on the fire. After a moment, she said quietly, "You didn't have to save me again." Cole didn't look at her. "Yeah, I did." "Why?" He rubbed his thumb along the grip of his revolver, avoiding her gaze. He didn't have a good answer. Because it was the right thing. Because leaving her would have haunted him. Because every time he looked at her, he saw something that reminded him of all the things he'd failed to fix in his life. None of those reasons felt simple enough to say out loud. Finally, he said, "Didn't seem right, leaving you there." She looked at him for a long time. Men who wear your coat don't usually think that way. Cole's jaw tightened slightly. He glanced down at the worn leather duster. "Maybe I got tired of doing what men like me usually do." The fire cracked softly. The sound filled the space between them. Aiyana leaned back against the wall, letting out a slow breath. "You said you were a bounty hunter." He nodded once. "You were looking for someone?" "I was," he said. "Not anymore." Her expression didn't change, but her voice was quieter when she spoke. "Because of me." He finally met her eyes. "Because I realized the poster was wrong." The air hung still. Aiyana's face softened slightly, not because she trusted him, not yet, but because she understood the weight behind what he'd said. He looked away first, shifting his attention back to the fire. His mind was running through possibilities: where to go next, how long they could stay hidden, how far they were from the next town. But another thought pressed through all of it. She wasn't just someone he'd saved anymore. She'd become part of his decision-making, part of the weight he carried. That realization bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Aiyana stood and moved toward the small window. "They'll come from the east," she said. "I know their tracks. If they find the river again, they'll follow it straight through." "You think we can outrun them?" She shook her head. "Not on foot. But maybe through the hills. There's a pass north of here. My people used it." Cole stood slowly, stretching his back. "Then that's where we go." He took a step closer to the window, close enough to see the dirt on her cheek, the small cut near her temple. Her hair was still damp from sweat, strands sticking to her neck. He found himself wanting to say something normal, something that wasn't about running or killing or surviving, but nothing came out. Instead, he just said, "You should rest." She turned her head slightly toward him. "And you?" "I'll keep watch a while." She hesitated, studying his face like she was trying to decide if she could trust that answer. Then she nodded and walked over to a pile of old blankets in the corner. She lay down, pulling his coat over her again. Cole watched the fire burn lower. The light threw long shadows across the floorboards, stretching toward her. He could hear her breathing slow, steady again. He felt tired in a way he hadn't felt in years, not just from the running, but from the thinking. Every choice he'd made since pulling her from that river had pushed him further from the man he used to be. Maybe that was what he wanted. Maybe not. Outside, a coyote called once, distant but sharp. Cole's hand went automatically to the gun at his side, then dropped again when he realized it was just the sound of the night settling in. He leaned back against the wall, watching the last ember fade. The chase would start again soon. But for now, the only thing that mattered was that she was breathing, and they were still alive. The sky was still black when Cole opened his eyes. He hadn't slept more than an hour, maybe less. The fire was out, only a faint line of smoke curling up from the ashes. The air had turned cold, the kind of cold that made breath visible, sharp in the chest. For a moment, he stayed still, listening. The sound of night insects had faded. There was only the steady rhythm of Aiyana's breathing and the distant murmur of wind moving through the canyon brush. Then something else, faint, irregular. A metallic clink. A horse snorting. Cole's pulse jumped. He sat up slowly, reaching for his revolver. His mind was already moving fast, cutting through possibilities. Could be nothing, a wild horse, a trapper passing through. But he'd heard too many men move through the dark not to know that sound belonged to saddles and boots. He leaned toward Aiyana and touched her shoulder lightly. "Wake up," he whispered. Her eyes opened immediately. No confusion, no hesitation. She looked at him, then at the door. She could read his expression, danger. Cole nodded once. "They found the trail," he said quietly. She sat up, pulling the coat tight around her, and stood without a sound. Her knife was already in her hand. "How close?" "Close enough." He moved to the window and looked through a crack in the boards. The first faint line of gray was showing in the east, barely enough light to see shapes. Down by the riverbed, he counted 3 horses. Maybe 4. "They're searching slow," he muttered. "Trying not to spook us." Aiyana came beside him, silent. "If they circle the ridge, they'll see smoke from the fire." Cole cursed under his breath. He had covered it with dirt, but maybe not enough. He grabbed his saddlebag and slung it over his shoulder. "We move now," he said. Aiyana nodded once and followed him out the back. The wooden door creaked faintly, but they didn't stop. Outside, the air was damp with dew, and the ground was cold beneath their boots. They moved fast but careful, staying low, weaving through the brush that lined the back of the shack. The canyon stretched ahead, rough terrain, narrow passes, jagged stone cutting up into the dim light. Cole's mind was running through routes. If they headed north, they could use the pass she mentioned. It would be slower terrain but harder to track. East was open ground, death if the riders caught sight of them. "North," he whispered. She didn't argue. They climbed, breath steady but quick. The sound of hooves behind them was faint but growing clearer. Cole felt his muscles tense, that old, automatic awareness settling in, not fear, but calculation. Every second mattered. Every move had to count. Halfway up the slope, Aiyana stumbled, her foot sliding on loose rock. Cole caught her arm before she fell. For a split second their eyes met, close enough for him to see the dirt on her cheek, the quick rise and fall of her chest. She pulled back gently, steadying herself. "I'm fine," she whispered. He nodded and kept moving. At the top of the ridge, they dropped behind a cluster of boulders. Cole crouched, scanning the land below. The riders had reached the shack. He could see the shapes dismounting, rifles in hand. One of them kicked open the door. Another pointed toward the hill. "They know," Aiyana said quietly. "Yeah." He looked around fast. The ridge stretched north into a line of scrub and twisted trees. It was cover, but not much. Still, it was better than waiting here. "We keep moving," he said. "They'll come after us soon as they see tracks." They started again, climbing along the ridge. The light was stronger now, pale gray turning slowly to gold. The land below was waking up, every rock and bush casting long shadows. Cole could feel the strain in his legs, the weight of his revolver pulling at his side. Sweat ran down his back despite the cold. But what kept his focus sharp wasn't exhaustion. It was the thought of the men below, the rifles, the way one bad decision could end this before it began. When they reached another rise, Aiyana slowed and crouched. "There," she said, pointing. Between two cliffs was a narrow cut in the stone, half hidden by brush. "The pass. If we make it through, they can't follow with horses." Cole nodded, and they ran the last stretch. The sound of gunfire cracked behind them, a single shot, then another. Dust kicked up near their feet. "Keep moving," Cole barked, his voice low but sharp. They ducked into the cut just as another bullet hit the rock beside them, sending shards flying. Cole spun and fired one round back, not to hit, just to buy seconds. Inside the pass, the light dimmed again. The walls rose high, tight enough that sound echoed. Their footsteps splashed through shallow water pooled from the last storm. The air smelled of wet stone. They didn't stop until the gunfire faded. Finally, Cole slowed, breathing hard. He leaned a hand against the wall, trying to steady his pulse. "You all right?" Aiyana nodded, though her voice came rough when she answered. "Yes." She was flushed, chest rising fast. "They won't stop." "No," he said. "They won't." He wiped sweat from his forehead and looked down the narrow trail ahead. "But they'll lose daylight soon. We'll rest once we're out of sight." She looked at him for a moment, his face tight with concentration, the lines near his eyes deeper in the dim light. Then she said quietly, "You could have left me back there. Would have been easier." He met her gaze. "Maybe," he said. "But easier's not always right." Neither of them spoke after that. They walked in silence, the sound of boots echoing against stone. By the time the sun finally cleared the canyon rim, the pass opened into a wide basin filled with tall grass and low trees. It looked untouched, quiet, isolated. Cole scanned the horizon and saw no movement. "This'll do," he said. "We stop here. Just long enough to breathe." They dropped near a small rise, hidden by brush. Cole set down his pack and checked the revolver again. His hands shook a little, not from fear but from the come-down, the body's way of catching up after hours of tension. Aiyana sat nearby, silent. Her face was calm, but her eyes gave her away, the flicker of adrenaline still fading, the careful control of someone used to danger. Cole looked at her. "You sure that pass leads somewhere?" "Yes," she said. "To the old trails my people used. The soldiers don't know them." He nodded. "Then we keep moving tonight." She hesitated. "You should sleep. Just a little." He gave a short breath of a laugh. "Can't. Not yet." But her tone stayed steady. "You can't watch forever." He studied her face again, then finally sat back, leaning against a rock. "Wake me if you hear anything." She gave a small nod. Cole's eyes stayed open for a while, watching the pale sky brighten. He could hear her breathing, steady again, just a few feet away. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it was something close, a fragile kind of understanding built under fire. And as his eyes finally started to close, he realized that every step away from the river, from the bounty, from everything he used to believe in, was pulling him deeper into something he couldn't walk away from anymore. The morning came slowly, the light breaking over the canyon in pale, dusty gold. The cowboy was already awake, sitting near the burned-out fire. He rubbed his face with both hands, his eyes heavy but alert. The Apache woman still slept wrapped in a wool blanket he had given her. Her breathing was shallow but steady, her skin warmer than the night before. The sound of the river nearby had calmed, its rushing replaced by a steady, low murmur. He looked at her for a moment, wondering who she really was. Her clothes were torn, her wrists bruised from what must have been rope bindings. The details bothered him. Someone had tied her up, dragged her, left her to die. He felt an old, familiar anger rise in his chest. Not the kind that shouted, but the kind that built slowly, tight and cold. He poured some water into a tin cup and touched her shoulder gently. She woke instantly, flinching back with a quick, defensive motion. For a moment, her eyes were sharp and terrified, then she recognized him. Her body relaxed, but only a little. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You're safe now." She blinked, then tried to sit up. He moved to help her, but she waved him off, stubborn. He saw the pride there, the refusal to appear weak in front of him. It reminded him of himself after his last gunfight, refusing help, pretending the pain didn't matter. She spoke something in Apache. He didn't understand, but her tone was wary, questioning. He shook his head. "Don't know your words," he said. "But you need food." He handed her a small piece of jerky. She hesitated, then took it, chewing slowly. As she ate, he thought about what to do next. The nearest town was 2 days away, but bringing her there would raise questions he wasn't sure he could answer. He'd been avoiding the law for months after a dispute turned violent in a border town. Helping her might drag him back into trouble. But he looked at her again, saw the raw marks around her wrists, the fear still flickering behind her eyes, and he knew there was no other choice. He couldn't just leave her. He stood, kicked some dirt over the fire, and packed his things. "We move," he said simply. She didn't respond, just watched him, uncertain. He gestured toward the horse. "You ride. I'll walk." She shook her head and said something short and firm in her language. Her tone made him pause. Then she stood, unsteady, but determined, and took a few steps forward. She was still weak, but she was trying to walk on her own. He couldn't help but feel a trace of respect. They started along the dirt trail that wound beside the river. The morning air was dry and cool. Every sound seemed sharper, the crunch of their boots, the creak of saddle leather, the distant call of a hawk. As they walked, the cowboy's mind worked quietly. He tried to piece together what had happened to her. He knew enough about the land to guess she had escaped from a raid or been taken by bounty hunters. The frontier was full of men who saw people like her as trade goods. That thought made his jaw tighten. After a long silence, she spoke again, this time slowly, pointing to herself. "Taya," she said. Then she pointed to him. He hesitated before answering. "Luke." She repeated it carefully. "Luck." He gave a faint smile, the first in days. For a few moments, there was a fragile sense of connection between them, not trust yet, but something close to it. The trail stretched ahead, dusty and endless, but now they walked it together. And though Luke didn't know where it would lead, he felt a quiet certainty forming deep inside. He was meant to find her, and whatever came next, he wouldn't let her face it alone. The sun was already high when Luke spotted dust rising on the far edge of the plain. He stopped, narrowing his eyes against the glare. The air shimmered with heat, but there was no mistaking it. 3 riders were coming their way. Slowly, purposefully. Taya noticed his sudden stillness and followed his gaze. Her shoulders tensed. She said something under her breath, low and uneasy. Luke didn't need to understand the words. He could feel what she felt. "Stay close," he said quietly. He scanned the land around them, flat, open, nowhere to hide. The only cover was a cluster of low rocks about 50 yards away. Not much, but better than standing in the open. He grabbed the reins of his horse and motioned for Taya to move. They hurried toward the rocks, keeping low. The sound of hooves grew louder. Luke crouched, resting one hand on his revolver. His heartbeat was steady but heavy, the kind that came from experience rather than calm. He'd been in this position before. He knew what it could turn into. The riders came into view. 2 men and a boy, all wearing dust-coated coats and hats pulled low. The lead rider had a rifle across his saddle. Luke recognized that stance, the way the man sat, alert but relaxed. "Bounty hunter." "Don't move," Luke whispered. "They might not see us yet." Taya crouched beside him, watching through a narrow gap between the rocks. Her breathing was quick but silent. He could see her hands trembling slightly, fingers tightening on the edge of the rock. The riders slowed. One pointed toward the riverbank where Luke's horse tracks were still fresh. The man with the rifle dismounted, knelt down, and studied the ground. Luke cursed under his breath. He should have covered the tracks better. Within seconds, the man straightened up and called to the others. They turned their horses toward the rocks. Luke's pulse jumped. He checked the revolver. 5 bullets left. He glanced at Taya. Her eyes met his, sharp and aware. "No panic now. Just readiness." "They're coming," he said. "If they shoot, you drop and stay low." She nodded once. Luke waited until the riders were close enough for voices to carry. Then he stood slowly, gun in hand but pointed down. "That's close enough," he called out. His voice was firm, calm, practiced. The man in front smiled faintly. "Didn't mean to sneak up on you, stranger," he said. "We're looking for someone." Luke didn't move. "Ain't got anyone here but me." The man's eyes shifted, scanning the rocks. "You sure about that?" "Word is there's a runaway, Apache girl, about yay tall." He raised a hand, palm flat at chest height. "Some folks say a drifter was seen helping her." Luke felt the tension in his gut harden. He forced a shrug. "Sounds like a waste of your time." The man's expression didn't change, but his hand rested on the butt of his revolver. The air between them tightened. Luke could feel Taya's quiet breath behind him. One of the other riders, a younger man, shifted in his saddle. "He fits the description, Wade," he muttered. "Brown hat, old duster, traveling alone." Wade's smile disappeared. "You heard the kid. Maybe step out from those rocks so we can have a better look." Luke's mind worked fast. If he moved into the open, they'd see Taya immediately. If he refused, they'd draw. There was no safe way out. He took one slow breath, feeling the weight of the gun in his hand. "You don't want to do that," he said. "You walk away now, and we forget this meeting ever happened." Wade tilted his head. "You threatening me, cowboy?" Luke didn't answer. His eyes locked on the man's hands. The second Wade's thumb brushed the hammer of his revolver. Luke fired first. The crack of the shot tore through the open air. Wade staggered backward, a red bloom spreading on his shoulder. Chaos followed. The younger rider yanked his rifle up, but Luke dropped him before the barrel cleared the saddle. The third man turned his horse, panicking, spurring it hard toward the ridge. Luke ducked behind the rocks. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. His heart pounded, adrenaline cutting through the stillness. He looked back. Taya was crouched low, wide-eyed but unhurt. "Come on," he said, grabbing the reins. "We gotta move." They ran for the horse, mounting fast. Taya clung to him as they rode hard across the plain, dust flying in their wake. He didn't look back until they reached the cover of a shallow ravine. Only then did he slow down. His breath was heavy, his hands shaking slightly as he checked his gun. 2 bullets left. He looked at Taya. She was staring at him, silent, her expression unreadable. Fear, maybe, or disbelief. "I didn't want to kill them," he said quietly. "But they wouldn't have let us go." She nodded once, slowly, as if she understood. Luke turned his gaze toward the horizon. The sky was a flat, endless blue. Somewhere ahead was safety, but now he knew what they were up against. Someone had put a price on her head, and maybe his too. The thought stayed with him as they rode on, both of them silent, the wind carrying the last echo of gunfire away behind them. The storm came in fast that evening. Gray sky, dry wind, and the smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet. Luke and Taya had been riding for hours, neither saying much since the gunfight. Both were tired. The horses were breathing hard, and Luke could feel the animal's ribs working under his knees. He scanned the horizon for shelter. The land was uneven here, with scrub grass and old trees scattered along a dry creek bed. Then he saw it, an old cabin, half sunk into the slope, the roof patched with tin sheets. No smoke, no movement. Probably abandoned. "That'll do," he said quietly. They rode up. The door was half broken, hanging off one hinge. Inside, the air was still and smelled like dust and would rot. There was a table, 2 chairs, a rusted stove, and a cot pushed against the wall. Luke got down first, tying the horse to the porch rail. He helped Taya off, watching her stagger slightly when her boots hit the ground. She was stiff from riding and exhausted. Her face was pale, hair sticking to her cheek. "Sit," he said. "I'll check inside first." He moved through the cabin, careful and alert. No signs of recent use, no footprints, no smoke in the stove, nothing disturbed. Just old life, long gone. He lowered his gun and nodded. "We'll stay here till morning." Taya sank onto the cot without a word. Her hands were shaking as she reached for the canteen. Luke took it from her, kneeling beside her. "You're running on empty," he said. "Drink slow." She looked at him for a moment before taking a small sip. Her eyes were distant, unfocused. The events of the day were catching up to her now, the chase, the shooting, the running. He could see it in her face. Not fear exactly, but shock, the kind that hits when adrenaline wears off. Luke stood and went outside. He untied a saddlebag and pulled out a small tin of jerky, a folded blanket, and his old knife. When he came back in, Taya was sitting upright, watching the doorway like she expected someone to follow him. "No one's coming," he said, setting the supplies down. She didn't answer. He sat opposite her, lighting a small fire in the stove with dry wood from a corner stack. The flame caught slowly, filling the cabin with a faint orange glow. After a while, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, uncertain. "You didn't have to kill them." Luke stared into the fire for a long time before answering. "You think they'd have stopped?" She didn't reply. "They were bounty hunters," he went on. "They don't turn back empty-handed. Not with a price on someone's head." Her eyes dropped to her lap. "So now you're wanted too?" He gave a short nod. "Wouldn't be the first time." Silence filled the room again. The fire cracked softly. Luke reached into the bag and pulled out a strip of jerky, handing it to her. She hesitated, then took it. He watched her eat, slow, cautious, like someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days. There was something fragile about the way she moved, but it wasn't weakness. It was restraint. She'd learned to stay guarded. Luke leaned back against the wall, feeling the ache in his shoulders. "You should get some rest," he said. "I can't," she whispered. "When I close my eyes, I see them." He didn't know what to say to that. He understood it, though. He'd seen his share of faces that never went away. He got up, took one of the blankets, and draped it over her shoulders. "Then don't sleep," he said. "Just rest your body. We'll move at dawn." She looked up at him then, really looked. The hard tension in her eyes softened for the first time since he'd met her. "Why are you helping me?" He paused. The question hung in the air. He didn't have a clean answer. "Because I was there," he said finally. "And you were drowning." Her gaze held his. She nodded slowly, then lay back, pulling the blanket closer. Luke stayed where he was, sitting against the wall, his revolver resting on his thigh. He listened to the sounds of the night outside, the wind, the faint groan of old wood, a coyote somewhere in the distance. His body was exhausted, but his mind wouldn't settle. He thought about the men he'd killed. He thought about how fast everything had changed in 2 days. And then his eyes drifted to Taya. She was half asleep now, breathing steady, her dark hair falling over her face. He caught himself watching too long. He looked away, rubbed his hands over his face, and sighed quietly. Whatever this was turning into, it wasn't going to be simple. When the wind picked up outside, the door creaked open an inch. Luke stood, shut it tight, and dropped the bar across it. Then he sat back down beside the stove, gun close at hand, and kept watch till the fire burned low. The night stretched on. Neither of them slept much. But for the first time since they met, there was no running. Just silence, and the uneasy calm that came before morning. The sun came up pale and cold. A faint orange line stretched across the horizon, and the land began to glow in pieces. Dry brush first, then the dirt road, then the cracked windows of the cabin. Inside, the fire had gone out hours ago. The room smelled like smoke and sweat. Luke was already awake. He had been up before dawn, packing the few things they had left. His hat lay on the table beside the gun belt. He sat in the corner, cleaning his revolver with slow, steady movements, listening to the faint sound of Taya breathing. She stirred when he stood up. Her eyes opened halfway, heavy with fatigue. "Is it morning?" she asked, her voice rough. "Yeah," he said. "We've got light now." She pushed herself upright, rubbing her face. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders. The blanket slid down, and the chill of morning made her shiver. Luke tossed her his coat. "Put that on till the sun warms up." She looked at it for a second before pulling it around her. It was too big on her, the sleeves covering her hands. She didn't complain. Luke checked the window. Empty plains, no riders in sight. But the feeling of pursuit hadn't left. He knew how bounty hunters worked. They didn't stop because they lost a trail. They circled, waited for mistakes. Taya walked up behind him quietly. "We can't run forever," she said. He nodded but didn't answer right away. He had been thinking the same thing all night. The money on her head would follow her until someone made it disappear. That meant either paying it off, or removing whoever put it there. "There's a man in Yuma," he said finally. "He's the one who posted the bounty. If we reach him, maybe I can make this stop." "Make him stop?" she asked. He looked at her directly. "One way or another." She understood what that meant. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Outside, the horses waited in the cold. They loaded the saddlebags without talking much. The sky was clearing, the wind calmer than last night. As Luke adjusted the cinch on his saddle, he caught Taya watching him. She seemed distant, as if her thoughts were somewhere far ahead on that road. "You trust me?" he asked quietly. "I wouldn't still be here if I didn't," she said. He gave a small nod, then helped her onto her horse. When he climbed into his own, he looked back at the cabin one last time. It had been a shelter for one night, nothing more, but it felt like a pause in a storm that might never really end. They rode south, following the ridge where the land broke into shallow valleys. Hours passed in silence. The sun rose higher, and the air warmed. By midday, they stopped by a dry stream bed. Luke checked their water and rationed it carefully. He could tell Taya was running on willpower alone, her movements slower, her shoulders tense. He handed her the canteen again. "Drink," he said. She shook her head. "You first." He sighed but didn't argue. They shared the last of it. Then came the sound, distant hooves. Not many. Maybe 3, maybe 4. Luke turned his head, scanning the ridge line behind them. A faint cloud of dust, moving fast. "They found us," he said. Taya's hand went to her knife out of instinct. Luke grabbed her wrist gently. "Stay low. Follow the rocks." They dismounted and led the horses into the narrow cut of the dry creek. The ground was uneven, but it gave cover. Luke crouched near a cluster of rocks and looked back. The riders were closing in, 3 men, rifles slung, riding hard. He took a breath and steadied his hand. "This ends now," he muttered. Taya's voice was tense. "You can't fight them alone." He looked at her. "I'm not planning to die here." The riders reached the edge of the ridge, scanning the area below. The leader shouted something, pointing toward the creek bed. One of the men dismounted, checking for tracks. Luke waited until the man stepped into the open, then fired once. The shot echoed across the canyon. The man dropped instantly. The horses panicked, rearing up. The other 2 fired back, bullets cracking against stone. "Stay down," he yelled. Taya pressed herself against the dirt, clutching the knife. She could feel her pulse hammering in her throat. Every gunshot made her flinch, but she didn't look away. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Luke reloaded fast, counting the shots. He could tell they were splitting up, trying to flank. He shifted position, crouched behind another rock. One of the riders came closer from the left, stepping carefully. Luke fired again. The man went down hard. The last one didn't shoot. He turned his horse and bolted, disappearing into the distance. Luke kept his gun raised until the dust trail faded, then lowered it slowly. He exhaled and leaned against the rock. His hands were steady, but his shoulders ached. When he turned, Taya was already beside him, checking the wound on his arm. "It's just a graze," he said. "You're bleeding," she answered sharply. He smiled faintly. "I've had worse." Her fingers were firm as she tied a strip of cloth around the wound. When she finished, she looked up at him. "You didn't have to protect me like that." "Yes, I did." They stood there, close enough to feel each other's breath. The noise of the fight was gone now, just the wind and the smell of gunpowder. She didn't move away. Neither did he. "I'm tired of running," she said quietly. "So am I." He touched her face, brushing away a streak of dirt. For a moment, everything felt still, the fear, the exhaustion, the danger, all suspended in that single instant. Then he leaned in and kissed her, slow and steady. There was nothing desperate about it this time, just something certain, something that didn't need words. When they pulled apart, she didn't speak. She just nodded once, as if something had finally settled between them. They gathered the horses and started riding again. The road ahead stretched into the open desert. Yuma was still days away, but now there was no hesitation in either of them. For the first time since the river, Luke didn't feel like a man running from something. He was moving toward it, whatever it turned out to be. The sun climbed higher. The land shimmered with heat. Behind them, the wind covered their tracks. And for the first time, both of them rode without fear.